Currently is the Professor in Islamic Economics and also the Director of Economics for IIIT East and Southeast Asia. Before this, he has served as the Director of the Center for Islamic Economics and had been in IIUM from the 1990s. Is teaching Islamic Economics and also Economics in the undergraduate and graduate level, including the MBA. So next, I introduce Dr. RIASAT. He is currently assistant professor at the also Department of Economics and also having his bachelor, master, and PhD at IIUM. So we have now being two speakers that is know about Islamic economics and had been at IIUM for long. So without further ado, I invite Prof. Aslam to start his session.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, Brother Shazwan. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Habib, Datuk Jamil, and Dr. RIASAT, as well as students who have joined the session. As you may know from the program, this morning's session at 9 o'clock is now going to be talking about the economics discipline rather than was I think scheduled to be Prof. Fauzan. Anyway, so what I intend to do this morning is to, together with Dr. RIASAT, try to identify some issues in the area of doing research, right? Although the topic given is about choosing a suitable topic, but when I looked at the list of participants in this, in this group, they seem to be quite varied levels. Some from masters, some from PhD. But I think more importantly, I see some names that that are already quite senior. When I say senior, I don't mean in terms of age, but people who have already been doing the PhD for a few years now already. So meaning to say by now you've already got your topic, all right? So in that sense, I feel that maybe what I would like to share with you is some issues regarding how we go about connecting the Islamization of knowledge agenda to the topic that you are doing. Whether you have yet to start or even if you have already started, I believe the points that Dr. RIASAT and me will share with you, I think will be relevant. Yeah, will be relevant for your choice of how you do your research. Shazwan, can I share screen, please? And what I'm basically going to try and talk to you about, I believe all of you have had a very one full day yesterday, and looking at the presentations and what was discussed yesterday, I believe you have got a very good overview. In fact, not only overview, but I believe from the sessions of what Prof. Roslina and Dr. Shahya as well as Dr. Jamil covered, you have gone through maybe all of these things already, quite detailed, right? Quite detailed. And I personally, I remember when I joined the session in the first workshop a month ago, I benefited greatly from both Prof. Roslina and Dr. Shahya's presentation. I wish I had that presentation when I was doing my PhD. It would have made life much easier. Yeah? But I think you've gone through a very detailed discussion. So what I'm going to do today, together with Dr. RIASAT, and the way we have arranged it is, I will take about 20 minutes to present my part, and then Dr. RIASAT will hopefully take his 20 minutes to present his part, and then we will open for about 20 minutes for some Q&A. So as I mentioned, what I would like to actually try to focus on this morning is how we are in our research, whether we are doing masters or whether we are doing PhD. I believe that one of the big reasons that we organize this workshop is to enable us to bring in the Islamic perspective of whatever topic we have chosen, right? And sorry, are you able to hear me?
Just now we lost you, but I think you're back.
Yes, we able to hear you.
Yeah, okay. So whatever topic you are doing, I believe that the idea is, since this is IIIT and we are talking about Islamization of knowledge, integration of knowledge, therefore, the idea is whatever topic we do, we need to talk about how we present the topic from an Islamic perspective. Now, what do we mean by Islamic perspective? This can be a half day, if not 1 day discussion. But I think in simple terms, what we mean by integration of knowledge or Islamization of knowledge is what you see on the screen. Yeah, we are all developing, whether we are doing economics or we are doing business or we're doing finance, we want to develop contemporary Islamic perspective on those topics, right? And in the scheme of Islamization of knowledge, what this means is not only do we deal with modern knowledge. So if you were doing a master's or PhD in any university, all over the world, you will focus on modern knowledge. You will be doing something on banking, or you're doing something on productivity or whatever. You will be focusing on the literature that has been written mainly in the West, although now they also include works that come from other parts of the world. But this is all considered to be modern knowledge. Unless, of course, you are doing a topic on history of economics, right? Then you will go back to some historical discussion. But you will only be focusing on what is on the right side of the screen, yeah? Modern knowledge. What we do, and this I think is what Islamization of knowledge, integration of knowledge is all about, we bring the other input, which is the input that we get from our Islamic heritage, yeah, the Turaf al-Islam. So we try to integrate what we get from our Islamic heritage with what we get from modern knowledge, in order to address a certain issue or a topic or a problem that we want to do for our master's or PhD, right? Now, this integration process is not straightforward. Why? Because there are two types of knowledge. And surely as master's and PhD students, you should already know this. You have one called substantive knowledge. So if somebody is doing a topic on productivity or on production or whatever, you have the theories of production or the theories related to productivity. This is what we call substantive knowledge. Okay? But the economics discipline, the business areas, the finance, they are also having a certain methodological knowledge. How you came to those substantive output. For example, we do a lot of studies in, let's say, production. But in order to develop those theories of production, it has a certain methodology that you follow. And generally speaking, even in economics and other social sciences, we try to talk about the scientific method. We use basically human reason, and we use sense, our senses, yeah, in order to develop knowledge. So modern knowledge, whether it is in economics, business, in fact, in all areas, comes from this methodological position that only accepts reason and observation as our means of acquiring knowledge, right? So what we do from Islamic point of view is we try to talk about knowledge that we get from our Islamic legacy. Now, when we use this term Turaf, and this maybe we need to be a bit more detailed, we are talking about basically knowledge that we get from revelation, as well as the knowledge that our previous scholars have developed over the last 1400 years based on the revelation and the teachings of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So, in other words, when we use this word Islamic legacy or heritage or Turath al-Islami, we are talking about the substantive knowledge as well as the methodological knowledge that we have obtained from revelation. Okay, you can say it is the output of the Islamic mind, right? Based on the revelation that Allah revealed in the form of Quran and in the person of our Prophet, peace be upon him. So trying to integrate the two is not a straightforward task because we have substantive knowledge as well as this methodological knowledge. Now, all of you, I think you had a long session with Dr. Shaya yesterday, and he spent a lot of time talking about this research methodology, right? Yesterday afternoon, and it's in that process, in all the steps that he talked about. The process is how do you bring the two inputs together, all right? So for academics, as well as for all of you being masters or PhD students, when you are doing your research, you know, you have to decide what do you take from the Turath, what do you take from the modern literature that is written. And of course, Prof. Roslina, I think, helped you in the morning session, how to do systematic literature review. And, you know, you all are very lucky today. You have all these wonderful databases where you can basically get access to all these articles, and you can organize your literature review in a much more systematic way. So what do you take? At the end of the day, you may read 100 articles, 200 articles, 300 articles, but you need to decide what are you going to take out from those 200 or 300 articles, right? And what are you going to take out from the legacy, from the Torah? If you are going to talk about, let's say, a discussion of what our classical scholars did, what is relevant from Ibn Khaldun, what is relevant from Imam Al-Ghazali related to our area, right? Or even if we go back directly to the Quran, which verses of the Quran are you going to take out in order to apply to your area, right? So what do you take from the two sources? Very important. Secondly, how much are you going to take from Turath? How much from modern knowledge? Now, this is also a very important question that you need to ask yourselves. And I look at the different universities that the participants are attached to. Some of you maybe are in areas which are more economics in nature. Some of you may be doing Islamic economics or Islamic finance, but you are in Sharia faculties, right? So I'm assuming that if you are in Sharia faculty, then there will be more from the Turath al-Islami compared to modern knowledge. It could be, I mean, it may not be, but that seems to be logical. Secondly, if you are from economics faculty, then I would expect much more to come from modern economics or modern political economy. And then you try to integrate the two. So how much? This is another issue that you will have to decide while you are doing your research. And then, of course, the most important step in your research will be how do you integrate the two, right? And this one, yes, you can attend program, you can listen to what your lecturer says, but at the end of the day, I think at especially PhD level, you will have to decide how to integrate. of course, based on the guidelines given in, let's say, Islamization of knowledge, yeah, how you do it, etc. But at the end of the day, the PhD is going to be your work. So you have to be able to bring the two inputs together, right? Why is this not moving? Maybe I need to use this. Yeah? So the challenge for all of you is how to reconcile the two sources and how to use the various means to write your thesis. When I say various means, I'm talking about referring to Quran, referring to the Sunnah, referring to the scholar's work, using your akal, yeah, maybe even conducting empirical work, all of this, but how to bring this together. This is the challenge for all of you, right? In order to do that, we must know ourselves and we must also know others. Now, what do we mean by this? Simply, it means that in order to do research from Islamic perspective that brings in this integration of knowledge, you have to be able to know your Turath al-Islami as well as your own discipline. So if you are doing PhD in economics, you are expected to already have gone through undergraduate, maybe if you are coming from economics all the way, and masters in economics. The subjects that are taught, you need to have that level of mastery. You know, that's the term they use in Islamization knowledge. They say mastering the modern discipline. If you don't have any knowledge of economics and you want to do a PhD in economics, then you have to do the prerequisite reading. You have to do reading in the area before you can actually talk. So you need to know your own discipline, but over and above that, you also need to know the heritage. Therefore, you must, if you have no background, you must get access to studies that talk about Turath al-Islam. Yeah, you need to be able to go and access, for example, tafsir of Quran, the writings of our scholars who talked about certain verses of Quran and how they apply to economics, the works of Ibn Khaldun, of Al-Ghazali. You need to read up, especially those areas that are related to our discipline. Yes, so I mentioned to you, if you are doing a topic on production, you need to refer to the works of our scholars who talked about production. You may even need to go to the Quran directly. What are those verses related to production? And try to figure out how these verses are going to impact your study. Now, why should you do this? Right? After all, modern economics has been around for 250 years. All the best universities are in America, in the UK, in Europe. Why should you be interested to bring in, Islamic perspective? Well, this is what we are talking about in the whole agenda of Islamization of knowledge. We are talking about this idea that modern economics is not value-free, it's not value-neutral. And therefore, Islamic perspective means trying to analyze and resolve the problems from an Islamic perspective, from the values that we have in our Islamic worldview, in our sources of knowledge. All right? So that's the purpose. This also, maybe we need to have another session on why Islamization of knowledge. Now, crisis, and I think we all agree that our current situation, of course, the crisis this time is due to COVID-19 pandemic. So it's a different type of crisis. But if you just go back the last 30 years, there are so many economic and financial crises that have happened. At least 3 or 4 crises. Every 6, 7, 8, 9 years, there is a crisis. Right? So when you have a crisis, it gives us an opportunity for us to look at that body of knowledge that we call economics, that we say has got all the answers to our problem. So we find out, for example, during the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, 2009, that the reason why the crisis was allowed to happen was because there is something fundamentally wrong with the economics that we were using. For example, we were saying that it is okay for you to be greedy. Greedy is okay, right? Now, there is no ethical system in the world that tells you that being greedy is a virtue, is good, yeah? Or as we will say, using terminology of maybe Imam Al-Ghazali, being greedy is not sifat mahmuda. Yeah. So how can we teach in our economics that greed is good? But that is the economics that we are teaching when we talk about economic man is a self-interested maximizer, only wants to think of his own, profit and utility maximization. Something wrong with the system. Similarly, about risk transferring or risk shifting, right? We all know the stories about the crisis and how some people, they knew that their products were actually worthless, but they were able to sell it off. Yeah. So the idea in our economics is if you are able to shift your risk, you are good. But ethically, this is a problem. So what is our way of approaching it? That crisis gives us an opportunity to re-look at all those theories that we are teaching in economics, right? And in that process, we are trying to Islamize the body of knowledge. Now, this is certainly another topic we need to have a discussion, but I just want to tell you that there is a lot of criticism about Islamization, and much of it is because of what is happening in Islamic banking. A lot of people are critical of Islamic banking, and because they are critical of Islamic banking, they say Islamization cannot work. Why? Because they say, and this we need more and more discussion, they say that there is really not much difference between the Islamic bank and the conventional bank. The only difference is the interest is replaced by profit, and then we say Islamize the bank. But this is not what we mean by Islamization of knowledge. So if you are really serious about understanding Islamization of knowledge, you need to read the works of the scholars who are the main proponents of Islamization of knowledge. All right. Let me just end this slide by saying Islamization of knowledge means you must go to the foundation of the discipline. You cannot just solve the problem by trying to change interest rate with profit rate, but you keep the bank as it is. Everything else is the same. This is not Islamization. Okay, so Islamization means you need to go to the foundations of the discipline. Okay, maybe my last area, and I believe my 20 minutes is maybe already all up, but maybe in 2-3 minutes. Now, if you haven't chosen a topic and you are going to choose the topic, then let me just, there are two, well, it's supposed to be two tables, the left and the right. The first one is you choose a topic, let's say in Indonesia or in Malaysia or whichever country you come from, you want to study something for using data from your own country. But, so you choose, for example, Islamic banking in Indonesia, all right? But your entire analysis, the way you do the analysis, the type of benchmark you use, these are all conventional. All right? And you want to study, for example, the efficiency of Islamic banks in Indonesia. And you want to compare with efficiency of conventional banks. Okay? Now, the topic is fine. But the benchmark you use, if the benchmarks you are using are the conventional benchmarks, then how can you compare Islamic banks with conventional banks. Yeah. So, and we have a lot of studies. If you go to the journals, and believe me, in all the so-called high-ranking journals, this is the kind of what do you call it, articles that you will find. Analysis of Islamic banking, but using conventional framework, using conventional benchmarks. All right. And I would not call this, no, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying that this is not the best Islamization of knowledge topic you can do. All right. What you should do is on the right. You research a topic in an area or your country, but you use Islamic framework and Islamic benchmarks. And this is more difficult to do. Why? Because we don't have the frameworks and the benchmarks yet. Okay? So sometimes you want to analyze Islamic banking in your country, but because you don't have the Islamic framework and benchmark, you do the analysis using the conventional framework and benchmarks. Okay? So please continue. I'm not saying don't do it. You can do that. But there must also be more of you doing PhD thesis or master's thesis in developing the frameworks and the benchmarks. So that when you analyze Islamic banking, you are analyzing it from Islamic perspective. All right, I think this is a very important point. Now, I've already gone beyond my time, so I'm going to basically let RIASAT take the other parts of the my presentation. I believe Prof. Roslina has already done a very detailed discussion with you, so I don't want to repeat. Not only I will repeat, but compared to her presentation, mine is like you know, if I can use the analogy. We are now in IR 4.0 or whatever number. This will be like IR 1.0. Yeah, so this is manually doing what Prof. Roslina talked to you about yesterday. Yeah, so you can. I'm sure you can relate it to what she said yesterday. But maybe for now, let me just stop here. These are some of the readings. You know, if any of you are interested to maybe get a clearer idea and more detailed idea about how to approach knowledge and your research topic from Islamic point of view, especially when it's talking about the methodological issues and so on, you may refer to some of this. So I will stop now and give the session to Dr. RIASAT, who will make his presentation, and then we come back later for maybe some Q&A. So, Wallahu alam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Prof. Aslam, for your great understanding on the general ideas of how to integrate Islamization of knowledge to our research. Next, I invite Dr. RIASAT to continue the presentation on this topic.
Right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you very much, Brother Shazwan, for that kind introduction. Also, assalamu alaikum and my heartfelt greetings to everyone present here, Prof. Habib, Prof. Aslam, Dr. Jamil, representatives of IIIT, and all of you students who, you know, care enough to be here because, you know, you take your research seriously. It's really good to see so many of you here, and also attending, you know, the sessions that do not directly relate to you. You know, that's very commendable. Alhamdulillah. So just to put my presentation into context, yeah. What I will be presenting is how we can actually apply, because as you will see from the introduction or my background slides, let me just get my slides up first. Here they are. Okay, all right. So, you know that the initial framework that Prof. Aslam had presented about, you know, how we are supposed to integrate knowledge, right, from, you know, the Islamic heritage, applying, you know, the primary sources of Islam as well as the other sources with, you know, conventional knowledge or mainstream knowledge as we see it. It's sort of an application of that system, but of course in an economics context. And I thought the best way to get this across to you is to tell you directly of my own experiences as a student, as a PhD student. So what I'll do is I'll share my experiences, and I think it will provide you with some insights on how to approach your studies, or how to adjust yours, if you're already in your studies, inshallah. So that's the basic purpose of my presentation. Also, a request to Brother Shazwan, if you could just let me know during the presentation when I have about 7 minutes left, I would appreciate it. Okay, so just so that I make sure I'm on board the timing part. Last time I think I overshot a bit, so
Okay.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so here we are. This is a little about myself, okay, and this is how I'm going to be approaching the presentation. Right. So first, I'll divide this presentation into 4 parts: the background, some of the enabling elements, all right, which is very necessary for your study, and then we'll talk about literature review approaches, and then we'll talk about building on a narrative. Okay, so these are the 4 parts. So before that, a little about myself. As mentioned by Brother Shazwan and hinted by Prof. Aslam as well, I'm a product of IIUM. This basically means that I've done my undergrad, my master's, and my PhD here, and there are very strong reasons for me to do so. Many people look at this as a disadvantage, whereas for me, literally my growth kept on happening because I stayed in the same institution. And it's very important to realize that although some of us can be critical sometimes of institutions, because a lot of that Western ideology comes into us where we're like, look, our values should be more private, and there's this line, and sometimes we feel that the institution is crossing the lines with all these extra courses. But to be honest, for me, the continuous exposition to that kind of system actually benefited me. Let's say I started with my undergrad, and after I finished my undergrad, there was a lot of talk about how I should change my institution, and I should go into another institution for my further studies, and then switch again during PhD. And this was a very difficult decision for me to make, because the dominant narrative is you should change and you should adjust. But to tell you the truth, once I got into IIUM's Islamic economics program, it was a very different narrative, because after my O and A levels, I took A-level economics. We're generally taught economics as, it is the, like the overview subject. It's the physics of the business world. It's like one of those mother subjects. And that's one of the main attractions of economics. It gives you the big picture. And, this is why many of us are attracted to, sciences like biology, because we can see the whole picture. And this is the charm of economics. And so I really bought the narrative hook, line, and sinker when I first joined. And when I came to IIUM, the interesting thing was, when I started getting exposed to, another narrative, okay, which is where we come to the second part of it, right? I start seeing that, IIUM actually has a different take on economics, and that there's a different narrative here, that economics is not getting everything right. And suddenly you start noticing these things, or these things are brought to our attention by our lecturers. For example, yes, economic growth is improving, GDP is going up in all the countries. However, if we look at inequality, right, you'll see inequality in, some of the richest states of the world. Even in the United States, presently, inequality is increasing, although baseline incomes are also increasing. But why is the gap increasing between the two? And this doesn't only happen even in these superpower countries. It happens within states, within cities. So, whenever we look at economics from the big picture, when we look at averages, it seems okay. But when you start going down, into details and stuff, we realize that, there's something very wrong with the entire thing. And this is the narrative that I started seeing. And I believe that if I switched institutions, I would not be able to see that. And not only that, if you look at what I did for my master's and my PhD, you'll see literally that from my master's, I was able to actually build on that narrative into a PhD. So that consistency in my education, that really helped me consolidate myself in this area. It helped me actually get a bigger picture or develop a picture of what's happening. So this idea that Prof. Aslam mentioned, that we need to make sure that we expose ourselves and we know the fundamentals of the discipline is very, very important. Okay, so this is something that IIUM gave me, and I think I was very lucky, and somehow I managed to make the right decisions, and I don't regret it. The other thing, being an IIUM, that I became aware of early on, except that, there is an alternative narrative, is that, Islamic banking and finance has hijacked that narrative. And I put hijacked, of course, in inverted quotes here. And this is because, when we first started learning economics, we knew that there was an alternative narrative, but there was another emerging narrative which became popular and became mainstream, and which was that of IBF. And the thing about the IBF narrative is that it kind of took mainstream methods, as Prof. Aslam mentioned already, and it sort of, packaged Islamic finance using mainstream methodology and, mainstream systems. The only thing unique to it being that, it applied certain aspects of fiqh to, deal with the Islamic issues. So, what we have is Sharia compliant banking rather than, Sharia-based banking, right? So this is something else that I became aware of early on, thanks to, lecturers, giving us that thing. So my background in IIUM has been very, very critical in establishing, the Islamic worldview, what it is, what are the narratives, that kind of thing was very, very, very critical in raising me as a, as an aware researcher, you could say. Okay. So some of you might be thinking that, wait, what if I don't have that background? To be honest, I didn't have that background either. Okay. I come from a very, English medium background. I was, I was with the embassy, so I was traveling to different countries, different parts of the world. I was born in Canada, I was raised in Zimbabwe, and then a lot of my tertiary education was only in Malaysia. So I actually came to the Islamic narrative much later than many people, but I was able to, take interest. I was very fascinated that, there's another narrative out there and I wasn't aware of it. So you could be concerned about, you not having the requisite background, but to be honest, I wouldn't also go far out and say that, oh, I'm some expert. But to be honest, I just took interest. I was very passionate and I kept, following up where I needed to. I kept having dialogues with the relevant lecturers, right? And that's what really helped me, okay? So so these are some of the enabling elements, right? The first thing is that, you have to have a purpose. Okay, so I had that sense of purpose early on, that there is something broken here, something needs to be done. The second thing is, you need to have a narrative, like, okay, what's happening in the discipline, right? What's wrong with the discipline? What's going on? Okay, that's the second thing. So I was able to develop those values as well. The third thing I mentioned is, which is very important, is that you get the right guidance. As Prof. Aslam said, ultimately the decision is yours, okay? But there is still a need for you to charter your, to navigate uncharted waters. Like, okay, I have an idea, this is what I should be doing, but you need some confirmation. And this is where finding the right supervisor is very important. Again, some of you might ask, well, what if I can't, right? So it's very important that you have a dialogue and try and find the right supervisor. If you don't get your main supervisor as the person you would like, then maybe you can get a co-supervisor as well. And if not that, then you can also make sure that you have dialogues with other lecturers so that, you can get a clear perspective of where you want. But having, the right supervisor was very critical for me. Okay, and I was fortunate enough to get Prof. Aslam as, somebody who was able to guide me, for my master's and my PhD. All right, so these are some of the enabling elements. All right, so now what I'm going to do is we're going into the third part where we're going to talk about two types of literature review, okay? So let's first look at the value-driven literature review. All right, now in a value-driven literature, this is what happened in my case, okay? My strategy was, okay, I'm aware of these narratives. There's something broken in the system, right? And I need to analyze this. And naturally, because I kind of was raised, or I became very conscious of Islamic finance and, how it's changing the narrative that we're used to. I wanted to look into this area because, everybody's talking about, Islamic finance needs to change. And, it's been like almost half a century and nothing has happened, right? So this was the problem I wanted to focus on. So what did I do? I basically looked at trying to identify the core problem because, obviously there has been literature for a while, but nothing's changing. So I wanted to look into why is it debt-based? Why hasn't it changed? Right. So I started looking at performance issues. So there were many things I looked into, for example, efficiency, profitability, risk profile. I basically started looking at literature everywhere to try and see if I can identify a problem and what are possible problems. So I've kept a very open mind. And I didn't really feel threatened by the fact that there were so many possible problems. I kind of just looked at them and said, okay, I'm not going to worry, because if Prof. Aslam went a bit deeper into the literature review, I think, even the previous presentations, right, about literature reviews, I think you learn about how to categorize the important articles from that. So as long as I had that, I wasn't too concerned, and I just started taking in everything. So I looked at, okay, could it be a market structure problem? Like, for example, is it an oligopolistic market? Could there be a regulatory framework problem as well? Is just Sharia compliance is not enough? Could it be a monetary system architecture, because the Islamic finance industry is sort of following the design of the conventional method? Is that what's causing the problem? Is it because of the non-pragmatic nature of alternative models? Okay, like, for example, when we look at Islamic alternatives to conventional models, we do not have another model, right? The models that we talk about maybe about a few centuries ago that were in use, soon after a few centuries after the Prophet ﷺ's time, maybe those are not applicable anymore. Could that be the problem? All right, is it the mindset of practitioners who do not want to change and they want to stay focused? So I looked at all these areas, okay, and I was trying to identify the core problem. So this is where I was sort of driven by my values, and I tried to follow them, and this is where I was. Okay. The other alternative is of doing your literature review is where you take a gap-driven approach, and this is the more conventional approach. The conventional approach says that in order to kind of remove your personal biases, what you need to do is you need to look at the literature as it is and try and identify the gaps that are identified in the person doing the study. And then you try and find whether you can fill that gap or not. So that's the more conventional or mainstream or, the less value-driven approach, you could say, okay? And so here, what you're doing is, I call it an adoptive approach, because you're adopting the gap that is identified by the person who, or the people who have been doing the study or, the literature review you're studying. So you kind of adopt their gaps and you fill in that gap. So that's the more conventional approach. So what's your strategy then? Analyze the latest literature and, fill in the gaps. So here you would identify the areas of IB where most recent literature focuses. For Islamic finance, because I'm trying to give a very specific example, I apologize to others who are not in this area, but I hope, you're able to kind of extrapolate what I'm saying, to your own area and do that. But basically, I'm focusing on Islamic finance because of this, because just to give a clear context. So coming back to this, you might want to do a risk profile of banks. So you're looking at credit, liquidity, insolvency, different types of risk, right? RRR, DCR, SNR, these are types of Islamic finance risks. Don't worry too much, it's just a technical term. And then, you might want to look at, developing a hierarchy, because, dominant literature actually will point you towards this area, okay? Most recent literature will tell you that credit, liquidity, and insolvency, these are the main concerns of Islamic finance right now. So what you would try and do is identify, well, which is the most important type of risk here, right? So do you notice that compared to my approach, which is a value-driven literature review versus a gap-driven, most of the recent literature will show you that, this is the gap. Like, we need to find out what is the hierarchy, which risks are important. We need to go deeper into risk analysis, okay? So that Islamic banks can become more competitive compared to conventional banks. This is the main challenge for Islamic banks right now, or Islamic finance, right? How to be more competitive. So do you notice there's a switch in the narrative already? Rather than looking at the whole system, like what's the problem with the system, we're actually looking at how to make Islamic banks more competitive, right? So this is an issue with the adoptive approach. The narrative kind of shifts according to what you're reading. The results that you will get is IBs are better able to mitigate risk or minimize that risk, and are now more efficient if the industry picks up on the research. So your research outcome will basically be that, this kind of risk is very important, and conventional banks Islamic banks need to deal with this risk. And if they deal with this risk, then, Islamic banks will get better and better. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, so let's compare the two outcomes, which I kind of did already, but let's go through it. So the first issue is when we look at the gap-driven versus value-driven approaches, solving the micro problem does not address the bigger problem. So if you look at how Islamic banks need to be more competitive, right? Does that actually address the issue of why Islamic banks are not changing their nature, right? Or not becoming, adopting a different model, becoming less debt-based, Does it address that problem at all? Okay, so because, of that micro focus, that is lost. The second thing is, another realization is that, in fact, solving the micro problem may enable the bigger problem. If you're actually, if your study actually contributes to how Islamic banks can become more competitive, right? Then what you're saying is that, well, we're trying to make Islamic banks better as they are right now, rather than trying to structurally change Islamic banks. You get it? So you're actually making that problem worse. You're actually making Islamic banks better as they are, rather than looking at the bigger picture. Okay. So when I make this critique, right, establish this critique, I'm actually making it from the point of view of the Islamic narrative. Okay, like, Islamic economics narrative is to change Islamic banking, right? So my critique is coming from there. What I'm not saying that, finding efficient or developing the efficiency of Islamic banks is wrong again, right? What I'm saying is that you are not addressing the big problem here, right? You're looking at the smaller issue, all right? And sometimes doing that can actually make the big problem, the root problem, even worse, okay? So somebody might say that, okay, if I take a value-driven, it's a macro approach. But if I take a gap-driven, it's a more narrow approach. But there are studies, which have done an overview of the literature in Islamic finance. So isn't it possible to do that? So, this is where I play devil's advocate, and I say that, well, yes, it is possible. And there are actually a couple of studies which have done this. They look at all the literature review and, still take a gap-driven approach, okay? So this is what it will be like.
5 minutes more.
Oh, I have 5 minutes. I think I should be able to finish it, inshallah. Okay, so tell me when I have 1 more minute, yeah. But yeah, I'll try my best. So when we look at the abstract of this paper, right, it says that, look, these are the gaps identified. There are no systematic documentation of research findings, there are theoretical and empirical deficits, and we needed a roadmap for development for Islamic banks. So what we need to do is we need to look at all the literature. So this study actually does something very similar to my research. Okay, so let's see what happens here. So the areas of focus, right, of the paper are governance, performance, risk management, marketing operations, and legislation. If I go a little back and I show you my area, right, look at this. They're very similar, right? There's a lot of things which this study picks up on, which is very similar to mine. So again, this is good. This is really good. Now let's look at the findings of the paper. Okay, so when we look at the findings, right, what the paper does is it actually kind of does a percentage analysis in each of the areas. And it finally says that, look, in terms of quantitative methods, this area is kind of lacking, and yet it's important to the industry. Okay, so these are the findings. It says strengthening of the industry's core business, right, and activities. So first thing is, it's saying that we need to develop the core activities that are already there. We need to strengthen it. Again, does this address the main narrative? It doesn't. It's actually saying the opposite. It's saying that we need to actually make it stronger. The same thing that the micro study did earlier on, the gap-driven micro study, where it says that, look, we need to address risk here. Risk is the core problem. So that doesn't look like, this type of study dealt with the main issue. New Islamic banking products, right, which are Sharia compliant and risk hedging. I think finance people will know what this risk hedging means. It means that Islamic banks are risky and they need to take alternative activities in the capital markets or the financial markets to hedge against that risk. Again, doesn't that sound familiar, right? Doesn't that sound like, conventional banking, right? So again, we're not really breaking out of the mold. Then, codification and standardization of Sharia guidelines. I agree with this. I think we need better governance frameworks. So this is okay. Finally, the other area of interest is development of new integrated growth sectors. Okay, again, this is proposed in line of Islamic financial markets, in line with conventional financial and capital markets. So again, closer to still following mainstream. So, the problem is that we get tunnel vision. We can't look beyond and see the bigger problem. Okay, so if you look at this, right, coming back to my study, all right? The idea of a value-driven approach. So when I look at all these problems, I realize that all of these are problems. It's not just one of these. So I couldn't choose and pick, right? I couldn't pick and choose from these. They were all issues. So what do? Then I identified the issue as a systemic problem. All the issues were a problem. So the main thing was that it was a system, and there was a way with the system. There was an issue with the system, which led me to a bigger problem. And I think some of you will ask, because Prof. Aslam was saying that there is no framework. So how do we analyze a banking system when we don't have a framework for developing Islamic economics, right? Or Islamic economic knowledge. So my study actually had to deal with another issue, and that is coming up with a methodology as well, okay? A new methodology. So don't let that throw you back. If, for example, there isn't a method, then propose a new method. And a lot of the times, I've noticed that the best way to do, if you're not able to come up with a method in a focus area, the best thing to do is go more and more macro and start looking at other areas of research. This is what I did. Okay, and then at the end of the day, I found something called systems theory, which was being applied in other disciplines, but was very rarely applied in Islamic economics. So I kind of looked at the Malaysian Islamic banking sector from a systems theory perspective and tried to identify what are the main systems elements and weaknesses. And sometimes you can use another model, okay? It can be criticized, for example, like, oh, but you're still using a Western model. But what I did was I looked at the German banking system because it had some unique elements which were sort of in line with Islamic finance. I wasn't saying that German banking model is Islamic, but what I established was there are certain good things, like, for example, its inclusive banking model, the way it includes other people in the process, right? These are good things that we want. So I tried to look at the German banking model and compare it with the Malaysian Islamic banking model and say that, look, these are some of the things we need to do. All right. So, when you're doing your methodology and things like that, there is a compromise.
1 minute more,
all right. Wonderful. I'm wrapping up very nicely here. So, when you look at the bigger problem, you have to make sure that you're able to compromise and find a different way around. A lot of the times it means going bigger picture and finding a different method, but even the methodology that you do is a contribution. This itself can become a study before you do your main study. So don't get thrown off by, oh, there's no method. Develop a method, think about a method. And believe me, if you do proper literature review, you have the right guidance, you can come up with it. All right. This is the conclusion. In general, convictions matter. It's very important that you know where you stand and you have conviction and you want to deal with the problem head on. Okay. The more specific implication is that, it's very important to have a clear narrative and understanding of the discipline, right? And, all the background worldview is supposed to guide you, and all of those things matter. And the main thing is to make a meaningful contribution. So I hope this was beneficial to all of you and you will be able to take from my story. Thank you very much. Right.
Thank you very much, Dr. RIASAT, for your great sharing moment of your experience. Right now, I open to participate for any
this is from
just one in Dimas Kusuma.
Dimas, yeah, Dimas Kusama. So let me deal with that one first, and then Prof. Aslam, I think, can give his take on it. But he's a former student of yours, Prof. Aslam, and he says he needs your views on concerning the indicators of the success of IOK in the context of courses taught. And okay, all right. So for me, I think a good indicator, again, but it's difficult to measure, is whether we can actually achieve that framework that Prof. Aslam has identified. And I took that as a personal challenge, right? To what extent can we integrate knowledge and achieve that integration successfully? So I would look at it as the more research that we have that is dealing with substantive knowledge and methodology, which is dealing with, or developing that framework, I would say that that would be an indicator of success. So in my case, for me, I literally looked at this because, well, Prof. Aslam really grilled us on this and drilled this into us that, you know, this is what we need to do. So I would say that's an indicator, you know, of this, the amount of literature or, you know, what we're getting in this area. Thank you very much.
Okay, so to Brother Dimas, you know, I think when you talk about your question, I think has maybe two different areas. One is on the course that we are teaching. So what is the indicator of success of IOK in the courses that we teach? And I think that is relatively straightforward. For example, if you look at the Islamization of Knowledge work plan, you know, of course, in Islamization of Knowledge, they are talking about the discipline as a whole. And what they want you to achieve is a textbook. At the end of the day, if you can have a textbook that teaches economics from an Islamic perspective, that would be a success, indicator of a success. Of course, the book must be a quality book. In other words, I just, you know, I don't take McConnell and brew and then I start with Bismillah and I end at the end, you know, put a few verses. This is not, of course, what we talk about when we say, you know, an alternative textbook. But each topic must be done authoritatively, you know, from an Islamic perspective. This can only happen if the people who are teaching the courses, meaning to say the academics, they themselves have, you know, the ability to do that. So, you know, you really have to also plan for it. It's not something that's going to come without proper preparation. So I would have thought that there has to be programs. I think many of you are in universities, whether in Malaysia or in other countries. You have to start a proper, you know, teacher training program. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to say that a few years ago, the Center for Islamic Economics, we were actually conducting quite a few programs, not only in Malaysia but also in Indonesia, with lecturers on how to go about teaching Islamic economics, and we adopted the way of asking different university lecturers to present what they are doing, and then we have a discussion. Okay, so teaching success, how to show IOK success in curriculum and in the courses, that will be in the way we do it and in the materials that we are using. All right, so that's what the impact on graduate is a bit more challenging, I suppose. On the one hand, we have to be able to produce students who are able to get, you know, some employment somewhere. I mean, I don't think, you know, no matter how ideal you would like to be, and it's an issue of knowledge, and we want to develop, you know, Islamic knowledge, etc. But at the end of the day, you also need to make a living. So we have to prepare students so that they can work either in academia or in public sector or in the private sector. So I believe RIASAT mentioned it just now. You need to know modern economics. You can't run away from it, all right? I think one of our major challenges also is that sometimes people believe that Islamic economics, you know, because my background, I don't have mathematics, or I don't have statistics, I don't know econometrics, but it's okay, I can be an Islamic economist. I don't think so, yeah? If you say you are an economist, whether you are conventional or you are Islamic economist, you have to have the tools of an economist. In fact, Islamic economists will even be one step more, because you need to also have the tools of your Islamic heritage. So it's an added requirement. Okay, so we have to provide and we have to produce students who can go out there and contribute. But I think more than that, as Dr. RIASAT mentioned, not only you want to be there, you know, being a follower, if I can put it in simple terms. You don't want to only be a follower outside, but you want to be a leader. You want to make the change. a very important slogan that, slogan may not be the right word, but a very important goal that we had in IIUM was that the graduates are agents of change. So I believe wherever you are, in whichever university you are in, including in Muhammadiyah Jogja, which is I think where Dimas is, your graduates must be agents of change. They must be the ones that enable change. Change, of course, to where we want to take the discipline. All right. Yes.
Prof, there's another, although there is another question from Facebook, since we are recording also, but I think I gave priority to participants first in this workshop.
Yeah.
I think there is several participants is in the area such as Nias, Dalila, which is it, Master in Economics, Rina Nur Shabrina, Master in Economics, Shakira Haneem, Doctor in Business Administration. Is there any question?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi Prof. Dr. RIASAT, my name is Shakira. I'm currently a PhD student and I'm focusing on finance. Correct me if I'm wrong. As from both of your presentations, I understand that Islamization of knowledge is not necessarily you put an Islamic variables to the to our research, but actually we interpret or we relate our variables to the Islamization. Because I had one scholarship interview back in 2019. One of the panel want me to add in the Islamic variable. I'm looking at financial capabilities of micro entrepreneurs. So he wants me to add the Islamic variables to the existing variables that I proposed. So that he said that it is more Islamic than what I am proposing. So what is your comment, Prof. and Dr. RIASAT? Thank you.
RIASAT, you want to go?
Ayman.
I think you can go first because, and then I'll add on, because most likely I'll say something and then you'll go beyond that.
So thank you very much, Shakira, for the question. Actually, I would recommend that you, if you can, and maybe we can try to find it for you, Shazwan. There is an article that was written by Professor Kamal a few years ago, where he tried to identify all the different things that you do that would be considered Islamization. Prof. Kamal used maybe a slightly different terminology, Islamicization, but basically whether you want to say Islamicization or Islamization, he identified, I can't remember offhand, maybe 11 or 12 different things that you do, which is all part of Islamization process. Okay, so in order to answer your question, I believe what the person said or told you could be considered to be part of the Islamization process. But what Dr. RIASAT was saying in his presentation about going for a new approach, etc., that is also Islamization, but maybe different levels. Okay, even when you critically review something, it could be Islamization, but it's at maybe a different stage compared to when you actually start to do your analysis using your framework. That's a different level of Islamization. So I think that if that particular area that you are doing could have an added variable in the existing framework, yeah, it would be one aspect of Islamization. Is it enough? Well, I don't know exactly the area that you're talking about, but for example, even though RIASAT said that, for example, the study of the conventional banking system, and what he did in his thesis, the first part was analyzing the current system. That to me is also part of the Islamization process, because he was critically evaluating the existing Islamic banking practice. It's part of Islamization. How can you ask for a different Islamic banking if you don't know what is wrong with the current Islamic banking? So that is also part of Islamization. Allah.
Thank you, Prof. I think Prof. Kamasan used the word relevantization, contextualization. I think.
Yeah, relevantization is more for the Turath. Okay. But when it comes to modern knowledge, what do? We say Islamize, but he prefers the word Islamicize. Okay, so there's a slight, I mean, there is a difference, but the relevantization is meant for those of us who are in the areas of Islamic revealed knowledge. If you are in the, let's say, Department of Quran and Sunnah, you're not going to Islamize it. You're going to, in IIUM terminology, we use the term relevantize. Yeah, I believe others have used contextualization and so on. Yeah.
I think we have the last question from the Facebook. I think maybe from Wan Omar, he asked, is there since we need to Islamize the knowledge, do we need to master certain knowledge or skills of Islamizing a subject, like mastering the subject matter of analysis, the methodology, ontology, epistemology properly from the beginning, or you feel it is a choice of researcher that depends on his ability?
Everybody has to start with what they have. I'm not too sure. I mean, of course, you know, Omar has been a regular in our session, so he's actually quite well versed, I think, in the issues that we are discussing. I think he's just trying to say that if we feel that, you know, you have to have a discussion of philosophy before you can go into the application, and those are all the areas of philosophy. What if somebody is just learning according to your capability? Nobody is going to ask you to do something beyond your capability, but it is your duty as a graduate student or as a lecturer to make sure that you give it your 100%. You have to be able to come to a proper understanding of, you know, the foundations of your discipline, so that when you want to try to Islamize it, you are doing authentic work, right? So I would have thought that you start from where you are, but of course, if you are at PhD level, you need to have, you know, effort at the PhD level. How do you do that? Well, follow what Prof. Roslina said, if you can. Yeah? Read 100 articles. How many a week is it? Good luck to all of you. Yeah? Well, you have to read a lot. There's no running. There's no shortcut. You have to read a lot. Yeah. I don't believe in IIUM we give enough reading. Seriously. Yeah? Students, of course, in the PhD class may differ. We have a 3-month course, and I think we have less than 50 articles. I don't consider that to be a lot. Okay, so what more your PhD thesis? If your PhD thesis, you should have, you know, I don't know how many times more. Yeah? So you really need to read a lot. But does it mean that everything is relevant to your thesis? No. You may read 1,000 books and articles, but in your references at the end of your thesis, you may just list down 100 or less, right? So you don't have to think that everything you read must become part of your thesis. Yeah. Reading it, that's the PhD journey.
Maybe last, from Handy Nugraha, one question about the role of worldview in Islamization of economics. Will the worldview make us see the economic problem differently? Do you have the recommended references about the role of worldview in Islamization of economics?
RIASAT, think you mentioned something about worldview in your presentation, so.
Oh, okay. So I think the question here is the impact that worldview might have, or being aware of the worldview. So again, it's about degrees or extents. Okay, for me, to be honest, I wasn't really aware of, you know, the alternate dimension, meaning from an Islamic point of view, until coming to IIUM. So Many of you may have been aware of this narrative before, like even before joining IIU, maybe in your foundation. But for me, it was all new. And to me, like, economics was very important to me. All right. And alhamdulillah, I was very confident about it. I don't know if I could say I was good at it, but I felt that I was. I understood its core principles really well. I internalized a lot of its things. And then suddenly I start going into the Islamic worldview, and I realized that, look, some of the most fundamental constructs, right, like scarcity, the way we look at human nature, right, on the surface, conventional economics, the sell is very good. It tells you that, this is who you are. And Prof. ASLAM always used to tell us that, are human beings actually selfish, or is it when they study economics, they get more convinced that they're selfish and they start behaving that way, So is it our study of economics that makes us even more that way? So that was a very interesting thing to consider, a very nice philosophical dimension. So basically it's about the degree, okay? Like if for example, when I became aware of Islamic worldview and I started understanding economics from a different perspective, it shook the most fundamental constructs of our understanding of economics and everything that economics is built on. For example, the way we measure progress, the way we measure happiness, even the way we define, utility and value, right? It's so secular and material, right? All these things are so fundamental. It flips the way you look at everything. So for me, it's very, very, very important. Okay, and if you're asking if there are texts, yes, there's plenty of literature about Islamic worldview, and a lot of discussion about scarcity, choice in economics, and what is Homo Islamicus and Homo economicus, and there's a lot of literature out there. So all you have to do is start searching, and believe me, it's like a rabbit hole. Once you go in there, you're stuck, and you're going to really enjoy it, and it's quite an experience. I'd also like to address the question before this, because this one was about, do we really need, and this is something that I felt insecure of when I also joined IIUM, because I was coming from the Western side, the mainstream knowledge side, and my worry was that, look, I don't have a fiqh background. I'm not good at Arabic. My understanding of my deen might not be like so many others around me. And, so this was a concern for me. But if you look at the Islamization model itself as it developed, okay, so there's a very nice overall survey done of, Islamization of economics. Okay, now we call it the integration of, knowledge, right? So when we look at the Islamization of economics and all of that, right, if you follow the history, you'll find out that at the end of the day, it is impossible to have mastery of both sides, isn't it? So you just have to make sure that as you're approaching, there might be areas of weaknesses, make sure that you supplement that with people around you. It could be a colleague, but I'm hoping it's a supervisor here. All right. And as long as you do that, as long as you have access to the narratives, the different narratives, then you can find your way, because you know what the fundamental issue is. It's about knowing, is this okay or not? And those things can be verified. So remember, don't try and take the whole world on by yourself. Okay, don't say that I need mastery before I can do this. No, you can actually go in and approach the problems as they come. All right. My methodology problem didn't show up. I didn't want to do a systems theory. You think I wanted to look at the whole Islamic banking system? No. But when I looked at the problem, then I said, oh, maybe I should start doing this. And then I realized there was a methodology problem. Then I started looking at methodology. So I had to seek guidance on all these issues. I didn't do it myself, So it's very important that you rely on that support framework. Otherwise, why be in IIUM? The point of being here or, being interested in this is taking advantage of these different bodies of knowledge. All right. And even for Sister Shakira's question, it's a very interesting one. What adds to value? I think it's very subjective, like Prof. ASLAM says. It is okay in an area where there is no Islamic variable. By adding a new variable, you are adding new value. You are engaging, and you are saying that, look, this is a variable which we have not considered before, but it is a variable we can consider, and that itself is value. So I should have put this caveat in early on, that my research is a journey of myself, and I ended up doing a systems evaluation. Does that mean that all of you have to do a knowledge system evaluation or a grand picture evaluation? Not necessarily. Okay, you can actually go into your respective areas and add new variables. The thing is, as long as you're showing that this wasn't there and this could be there and we need to look into this area more deeply, it is sufficient. Okay, so don't feel that, okay, you know, it's not enough and things like that. I think it's fine. Right?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Resat, and thank you also, Prof. Aslam. We already exceed our time. We end our session here. Thank you very much for both our speakers, and hope that what they presented is imparted to the participants.